It is my great pleasure to bring to you my very good friend and writer, Scott Raab. Scott, thanks so much for being with us today.
Ron, it's honestly a pleasure and an honor.
To be honest, this is a little bit unusual because you actually haven't written a book about baseball per se, although you have in your writings done many interviews with ball players. You've done uh, articles about baseball. I've seen a lot. I was just on Esquire .com archives today, and one of the things I found was you wrote from the point of view of Chief Wahoo. For
Yes, yes. I have a long troubled relationship with Chief Wahoo. It's true. And
you are a staunch Indians fan, and one of the reasons that I got the idea to do this at this point was the recent passing of Rocky Colavito, who I know
yes,
was a favorite of yours.
yeah, when I was a kid growing up in Cleveland, he was the first star that as a young guy, and such a good looking young ball player. And the jerseys, were the kind of white flannels and red. The guy was a young slugger, and I didn't know. I was born in 1952, so Franklin trades him after an awesome season, but I wasn't a sabermetrician at that age. I'm
Who
still not.
was?
No, but it was wrong. And I didn't know Frank Trader Lane. I knew that they'd swap managers at some point with the Tigers. I believe the Indians and the Tigers literally traded managers. I think Jimmy Dykes was one of the managers. Anyway, I knew none of this. All I know is Rocky Colavito's gone. I knew nothing about Harvey Keene or on base percentage and OPS plus anything like that. Not that I was devastated. It's just that I remember that summer my father needed a fresh start, so we moved out to Los Angeles. And maybe it's only in retrospect, Ron, that I realized everyone gets traded, so,
Mhm,
including me,
mhm.
sooner or later.
But among your interview, well, tell us some of the people you've interviewed, baseball figures you've interviewed for Esquire.
By far the highlight of that is Ted Williams.
Hmm.
The idea that I would ever be in the same room with Ted Williams. I was thrilled. I flew down to Florida. The Esquire magazine was my employer from, for a long time, almost 20 years. And I had to meet, he had an intermediary who was I don't think it was military necessarily, but he smelled tobacco. I was still smoking cigarettes. So he wanted me to, make sure that and I don't wear cologne. He didn't want Ted to object to anything. And I was extremely nervous. And we get to Ted Williams's house, and I guess he's in his bedroom, and I'm seated there. I have my tape recorder, and I hear this bellow from the bedroom. Rad! What kind of name is that? And there might have been an F bomb in there, you know. And I think it wasn't even. I mean, he had had, I think, maybe one stroke. He came out in his bathrobe and slippers, and he's still 6'4", and he's Ted Williams, and he's loud. That sounds like a Democrat name. And Esquire had arranged that day for John McCain to come in the afternoon. I had a couple hours in the morning, and I think the magazine was doing a Heroes issue, and John McCain's hero was Ted Williams,
Hmm.
both fighter pilots, all that. So it was quite a day. But the idea of being able to sit for a couple hours, me and Ted Williams, and it wasn't a whole profile. I mean, Richard Ben Kramer had a profile of Ted Williams. How do you like me now? So it just
Hmm.
legendary stuff. I didn't get to hit a home run. I got to sit for a couple hours with Ted Williams. It was awesome. And that afternoon, John McCain came over, and I was just a fly on the wall. Still a very memorable day. And on the other hand, I had a great editor, a young editor who's now at Random House. His name's Andy Ward, and he followed baseball, Yanks fan from Washington, D.C., and really was interested in the left-handed one-out guy. At that point in the mid late '90s, all of a sudden, whether it was Tony La Russa or not, bullpen usage was changing, and the Indians had Paul Assenmacher, a classic, come in, handle Ken Griffey Jr. We'll bring in someone right-handed to face Buhner or whatever. So Assenmacher couldn't believe that a magazine wanted to write a story. He was living in Georgia, Alpharetta, Georgia, pitching for the Tribe, and I went down there, and he was befuddled the entire time, but nice guy. Got to watch him pitch. BP. I didn't get to. They didn't want me standing in because they were worried about liability.
Mhm.
An old schlub is standing there and winds up suing. But honestly, I'm not trying to monologue here, but I had a dinner once at an Italian joint in Tampa with Don Zimmer because we were profiling Don Zimmer. I loved Zimmer. I I had written about David Cohn and was down in a Yankees camp for spring training and had seen Zimmer naked, which was extremely memorable. But the story wasn't about Don Zimmer, and I didn't bring it up when I was writing about Zimmer. But I did make the mistake of trying to pick up the check because if you're representing the magazine, that's how it's done.
Mhm.
They're giving us their time and insights. You buy dinner. He was ready to fight.
Mm.
He picked up the check. It was his joint. I was his guest, and he also got angry. I heard from him after the story ran. One of the things about interviewing, especially old ball players, is the profanity is unbelievable. It is part of the fabric of their speech, and there was no word from his era that Don Zimmer didn't use, and the magazine runs those words. There may be an exception, but he didn't use that word. I heard from him after the story that I had embarrassed him in front of his family, in front of his grandkids, that he does not talk like that.
Mm.
And I did him wrong. And I offered to send him one of the interview tapes. I didn't make up any of the language. We were talking about the guys who almost killed him with bean balls.
Right.
And I think Piazza, the thing with Piazza just happened where Clemens, where Piazza tossed the bat,
Right.
basically. And Zimmer was a wonderful, lovely human being. Talk about a baseball lifer. He and his wife, Sue, got married in the minors, and his teammates were holding bats
Mhm.
like a canopy. So, I mean, I've had some wonderful experiences with the game that I grew up. It was my first love among pro sports was baseball, despite the Cleveland Indians of that era. And it's been pretty fulfilling in terms of. I knew we were going to talk, on the record. It's the. I'm sorry, I should let you ask questions, Ron. I just get very. I'm excited to be with you. And, and no, and I'm jacked up because Pete Rose, I remember you gave me the Dowd report, among other, baseball lit that you've shared with me over the years. When Pete Rose passed, uh, Esquire had asked me to write a review of the recent HBO series, and I wrote my experience with Pete Rose journalistically was great, but I didn't like the guy. I'm pretty sure it was mutual. Whether that tainted the story or not isn't for me to say. But I know that when my review of that series ran, I got a letter to my basically defunct website, an anonymous letter that simply said, and I'll paraphrase, F you fat F. I was thinking I finally reconnected with Pete.
Mm.
That no one else would have sent me that. Uh, just out of the blue. I, I'm not saying I felt good about that kind of thing, but the idea that I got to sit with Pete Rose at his ballpark cafe in Florida while he's talking about touring Vietnam with Joe DiMaggio on a USO thing, and how he would they had some makeshift shower, and he would stand there and dump water down on Joe DiMaggio taking a shower. They had to use something to pour the water down so it would spray on whoever was trying to take a shower. And I'm thinking, wow, Pete Rose is talking to me about Joe. I'm not like naive. I enjoyed being the Esquire guy, but it was never lost on me that this was not something I ever expected, to happen, that I would get faced. I used to call hotels back in the day, visiting team hotels in Cleveland, and ask for Bill Monbouquet, some visiting pitcher, and just try and have a conversation with a ball player when I was a little kid. Here I was.
All right, let's talk a little bit about preparation. Do you find that when you do a Ted Williams interview, the preparation is going to be different than a Paul Ossenmacher just because of the level of disparity between the two players?
There's less ground to cover. I always like to think that what I would do, even with a movie star or politician, anyone I was going to interview, was immerse myself.
Mhm.
So with the Ted Williams, I got the Science of Hitting book. It's not like I didn't know who Ted Williams
Yeah.
was, but I reread Richard Ben Kramer's Esquire story. I tried to calm myself down. Uh, but I always do this. I don't write down questions, but I'll make notes for myself on a note card. If you're writing about Paul Ossenmacher, there's not that much to immerse yourself in.
All due
It's
respect.
but yeah, he's a great guy. I don't remember his being articulate about things, but I wasn't asking him about command and location. Just the feeling. How is it to be the guy who, nobody starts out in baseball, because in order to become Paul Ostenmacher, you have to have been great at every level,
Mhm.
and you wind up a one out guy. So that anomaly, he had in his basement those huge, framed jerseys of every team he'd been on, and he'd been on a few by then. So it's not even about envy. It's just about, I understood that these were humans who set these goals for themselves, and they had a singular passion for baseball. And their entire life, Paul Ossenmacher's entire life, was defined by that collection of high numbered jerseys in his basement. It it wasn't as hard to prepare for Ossenmacher because it was much more lighthearted. If I was going to talk, or even Zimmer, if I was going to talk to a guy who'd really spent his life in baseball. Not that Ossenmacher didn't, but a guy of Ted Williams' stature. Ted Williams was there when, as far as I know, when the slider was invented. Hated the slider, and thought he hated pitchers anyway. I mean, there's that natural enmity.
Mhm.
Uh, but it was different partly in terms of managing my own feelings, because I want to be present as a journalist. I don't want to screw up an interview with Ted Williams. So a lot of immersion. Again, it applied to more than ball players. If I was going to write, to do an interview with Taylor Swift, which I did in, I think, 2014, my nerves were always part of the equation, and part of the work, or trying to get lost in other material to inform me about the person I was going to interview. It helped calm me down and feel a little bit more confident.
Now, one of the things we discussed before we started this conversation, when I started working for the newspaper, I had no experience in journalism, and the idea
Yeah,
of interviewing people was extremely daunting to me. Like, why would people want to talk to me? Who am I? Yes, I'm
yeah,
representing the New Jersey News, Jewish News. You're representing Esquire, which was a national magazine, uh,
that's
well known for decades. So that you have a certain kind of uh, gravitas
Yeah,
that
yes.
a local weekly newspaper does not have. So I imagine even from the subject's point of view, oh, it's Esquire coming to interview me. So this is going to be more important than going to the Jewish news.
Uh,
So you come in with a little bit of respect
yes.
for who you represent and who you are because of your reputation. Uh, when you were first starting out doing these things, I imagine, I mean, you say it was intimidating even as recently as 10 years ago with Taylor Swift, but when you were talking to some of these people, it must be intimidating. I mean, the list of people you have interviewed range in notoriety from Taylor Swift, Bill Murray, uh, I mean,
Donald
actors,
Trump.
actresses, Donald Trump is a
Donald
perfect
Trump.
example. What
Yeah.
was that like? Even though this isn't a baseball question, what was that like?
It's if it's Trump in particular you're asking
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
it was 2015. It was Thanksgiving time, and it ran in February of 2016 with Trump in close up on the cover in black and white, looking angry.
as he
Uh,
does.
and I think the cover line was "Hater in Chief." Yeah, I've just said the Q&A with Trump. It wasn't a full story.
Yeah,
Uh, the Q&A itself was awkward. I was wanded before I got on the elevator at Trump Tower. I was wanded when I got off the elevator. My politics couldn't be more different. My understanding of Donald Trump was not formed by watching The Apprentice. It was formed. I had worked for Esquire for since 2005 on rebuilding the World Trade Center. So I knew a lot of real estate developers, people in the business. Nobody took Donald Trump seriously in New York City ever. Certainly not in the. He wasn't a real estate developer. He was a guy who sold his name and swapped buildings. And I didn't. I look. I He had just started. It was past the point he'd come down the escalator, so he was doubling and tripling down on a lot of things, making fun of the disabled New York Times reporter, things that have been lost in the fire hose of shit, basically. Sorry. So I was wearing a nice suit, and a friend of mine, I have a friend who's a billionaire, who's an actual billionaire, a fella I worked for a long time ago. I don't want to, but I had a Rolex. I had a gold Rolex and a suit. And he sized me up and, oh, good looking guy. And I said, you too. And then he disappeared. Our appointed time came, went a little bit by. They took me into his office, his main office, and the entire wall. He's sitting behind the desk, but the entire wall to his right is covered right and left with framed magazine posters with him on the front page. Hope Hicks, his assistant, was behind me, taping my interview with him.
mm,
And the only other person I've ever tried to interview who was as difficult to interview is boxing promoter Don King.
mm,
I mean, these guys monologue. They're not going to answer your question, and they're going to talk longer. They're going to say whatever they want. As long as they're talking, they're safe.
right.
You don't get to ask more. So we were scheduled for an hour and a half. At some point, Ivanka came in to run something by him. So I got to meet Ivanka. But the entire time, I'm thinking, how do I even pin this guy down? How do I talk to him about checks and balances? And maybe you won't be able to go in there and do whatever you want. I, I wasn't in control. I never felt in control. And then he decides, because he remembers it's Esquire, my boss, he has played golf with my boss more than once. Just in the middle of the interview, what's his number? Trump asks me. I give him my boss's number. He calls my boss, has a nice conversation. Anyway, when I was writing it, the Q&A, it was difficult. Part of it was my personal animus toward the politics, toward what I felt he embodied, and part of it was it's a Q&A, and one of the things that we all ask ourselves, maybe not baseball players, is why am I doing this? Am I going to make a difference? Is there anything I can do here to shed, to illuminate anything that's going to, if someone reads it, is going to change their mind about it? So there, what I remember is, yes, it's nice. I got to interview this absolute monster. I mean, to the extent he's managed to acquire power, I think his words and deeds have been nothing short of monstrous in many regards. But I couldn't get there from here in the sense of doing some. I don't know if I'm even capable of a hard hitting interview. Like you, I didn't come to journalism thinking, oh, someday I really want to interview people or write profiles of anyone. I was a fiction writer and a poet, and I was already past 40 when I started getting real magazine work. It was more the world telling me you're not really going to have a shelf of novels. You might have a collection of short stories that 2,000 people read, and they all have an MFA degree, like you, a master. So when I started suddenly writing I started with GQ, same boss I had at Esquire, but he was younger and was starting his career. I was like the luckiest guy in the world, and what came with it in terms of the interviews or the famous people, it all seemed like gravy to me. But sitting there with Trump at a time when I cared very much, a young, with a kid, thinking about the future, I love this country. I love, my people, none of my grandparents was born in America, all that stuff. What difference does an interview? What difference does a great cover with hater? It makes no difference. You
Well,
do the best you can. Even now, and this is the truth, I have friends still in the magazine business, still coming out. I'm living in Los Angeles now to do a profile of a movie star, and they're just as nervous as the first. It's, that part of it is always weird. You never, if this guy actually stays I don't want to name people's names, but he stays at, he profiled Owen Wilson. So that's his name. What difference does it make? I'm not saying anything bad, but I'm saying this fellow, an experienced profile writer, comes out. He knows Owen Wilson well enough to stay at Owen Wilson's house, but he's interviewing someone else and he's nervous. It's like it's always a blind date.
well,
That's what it
well,
felt like, and I'm always the sweaty fat girl or guy. You know, I relate. I still relate to all that stuff.
let's shift gears and talk about something a little happier. Uh, we're
Sorry, I didn't mean
no,
sorry
no,
about the politics stuff. Yeah,
no. I brought it up, so fair
yeah.
game. Uh, we're both of a certain age that I don't want to speak for you, but I don't really like what's happened to the game over the past few years. The changes that have been made, the money that's involved. I was speaking with some of my younger coworkers about this Juan Soto deal, and as
Yes.
much of a Met fan as I am, I hated the deal. I thought the money was absolutely ridiculous. The length of contract was absolutely ridiculous. The concentration on analytics, just I mean, it's like there are several different aspects of the game that I can tell you who played second base for the 1968 Senators. I cannot tell you who played second base for the Los Angeles Dodgers this year. And I don't know if how you follow the game anymore, but especially since you can't find these things in the newspaper anymore. There are no sports sections in newspapers anymore, and unless you have yeah, get off my lawn.
Let's
Uh,
yell at clouds. Yeah. No, right. Here's the only thing I disagree with what you've said. And this also was from a magazine experience in 2000. When A-Rod signed his $250 million contract, I was writing about A-Rod and his agent, Scott Boras. One of the things that I became convinced of then and convinced of now is none of my disgruntledness has anything to do with the fact that Juan Soto is going to make $750 million, over the life. What I mean is, it's an entertainment industry, and you and I, as baseball fans, are quite different from, let's say, a couple of people who've devoted or passionate about cinema. I never hear anyone talking about how wrong it is Tom Cruise or Will Smith can make 20 or $25 million a picture and 10% of the gross in perpetuity, and can do that over and over and over and over again for 30 or 40 years if they want to of their life. But Juan Soto, or a basketball player or a football player who risks their entire career every time they step out on the field, in a way no actor does or musician does, those celebrities are not the subject of this kind of, whatever it is, disgruntlement.
Mhm.
They earn their money. I mean, I sat with Tom Hicks, because Tom Hicks was the owner, or the running the Rangers at the time, and they were negotiating, and Boris was negotiating, and where's A-Rod going to land? And I don't know that people really think about what $1 billion is. That it's $1,000 million, $1,000 million. And this is partly as a Cleveland baseball fan, watching a team in a front office do the best it can, and knowing finally, as weird, as unfair, and as counterproductive to a love for the game that baseball's economic system is, it works for the billionaires just fine. It works for Steve Cohen. It works for the Dolans who own the Indians, and the Waltons. Winning is not the point to these people. Winning's the point to you and me. Juan Soto, however I dice the numbers, or just the eye test, got to be among the two or three best hitters in baseball right now. Depending on Mike Trout's health.
Mm.
So much of this money is deferred. So and now that I'm going to say that idiot Rob Manfred is talking about how this could become a problem, but all these billionaires are making money. All these owners, all of them, they don't open their books, and the only reason that they're paying Juan Soto what they're paying him, which is on its face objectionable. Who is worth this kind of money in a society where teachers and nurses, but that's not Juan Soto's fault. I came to the conclusion in 2000, if I was a ball player, if my kid was a ball player, if my friend was a ball player, I would urge them to use Scott Boras as their representative. Boris's own history as a minor leaguer and a utility man who couldn't hang on. That guy was kind of radicalized by his experience. The talent is the talent, whether it's Uma Thurman, Tom Cruise, or Juan Soto. And billionaires are going to pay them, what they feel they can afford. It's not Juan's fault, that taking a family of four wherever costs way more than most people can afford at best. Or I hear what you're saying, but I do think this golden at bat
Oh
is
my
going to
God.
turn it all around for all of us old guys yelling at
Oh,
clouds.
absolutely. Absolutely. So as we wind down here, what are you working on now? You working on anything you'd like to tell us
Oh,
about?
I'm the stuff that I'm most interested in. I don't know that you even want to hear this word circumcision. Have we talked about that at all?
Not yet. This is the
Yes.
first. This is the first for the bookshelf. Yeah.
But it is a subject of, I spend a lot of my time thinking about the meaning of life. I mean, partly because I'm 72, and I did some health issues, nothing dire, thank God. And look, baseball, every day I have teams now. I had one, in your honor a few years ago, on a site called Imagine Sports. This is not me plugging them,
Mhm.
but it's the only hobby I have. So I don't, at this point, I don't have anything. When I found out, that I had two children I didn't know about because of sperm I donated decades ago. I thought I'd be writing about that.
Mhm.
I'm just at this point. I don't know. I'm still adjusting to life in Los Angeles, to retirement in a way. I think I'll come back and do a little bit of writing for Esquire. They only publish 6 issues a year, and I think they're just looking for someone to contribute basically some humor, believe it or not. But I'm like the happiest retiree you're ever going to talk to. Meaning, I don't know about retirement. Retirement. I still try to write, but I never found it easy. I never wanted to trade on my years at Esquire and start pitching a story unless I felt a genuine passion for
Sure.
it. And the stuff that I feel most connected to now really is more of the tikkun olam. Is there anything I can do? Is there any issue I care about that might help someone else? And I think partly because it's not. I think a lot of what we've talked about is the result. Me talking to these is the result of uncanny luck. And and I know the business has changed in ways that I cannot adapt to. I'm never going to be an online guy.
Mhm.
So, I don't know what the next chapter is, but I'm 72 and I've had more than my share of, this kind of, fun stuff. Maybe I could do something to help another human being theoretically. I'm kind of teasing because I really am kind of limited in what I'm the worst teacher in the world. I tried that as a graduate student. All I ever was, and I'm lucky I knew when I was a kid, I'm a writer. And I don't know that I have anything that could be called a real project right now.
Well, even the fact that the stuff you've written, if people read it and it touches them somehow, it
Yeah,
amuses them, it makes them angry, it gives them some emotion,
yeah.
that's a contribution, you
Oh
know?
no, I always felt, especially when LeBron James left the Cavaliers through a bizarre series of again, it's good fortune, but it's also who you know. So I knew people who hadn't. I didn't have a book. I mean, I'd been at Esquire and GQ for many years before LeBron. But as a Clevelander, when LeBron left the Cavaliers for the Miami Heat, I had been trying to write a happy book about LeBron. Anyway, I got to write a really angry book, and I got to throw it all in there. Not just because it wasn't really about LeBron, it was about being a Cleveland sports fan and a troubled young guy. And I got to get all that out. I think I was almost 60. And people in Cleveland in particular loved the book. The title, my agent didn't like it, was The Horror of Akron. But as far as anything where I could reach a point where I said, well, I did I would never have been, I was a shoe salesman, which helps with the interviews, by the way. It helps, it helped me to have been a salesman. But the idea that I got a chance to write an angry book about the greatest athlete Northeast Ohio has ever produced, that was miraculous to me. And it was good money. It was more than I was making as a magazine writer. Not that it was a bestseller, but to have that guy go to Miami, then come back to Cleveland. I got to write another book, not that good a book, and win a championship. I'd waited 52 years since the 1964 Browns. Anyway, it's not like it's not like I'm left with a feeling that the work I did or the experience I had didn't wasn't meaningful or but it's not. It was all selfish in the sense of, oh my God, I was a shoe salesman in Cleveland. When I was 20. And my aspiration was maybe I could be, the local columnists when we were young, the sports guys, not the beat guys, but guys, when I was growing up, Cleveland had the press and the plain dealer. I thought, someday I could return to my roots and be the guy writing 2 or 3 times a week about that. That was absolute pipe dream for me. So, in terms of personal accomplishment, I didn't even have wild dreams beyond my wildest dreams. But that sense, I guess, as I get older, that it's meaningful. But I have, it's part of the yelling at clouds things. I have so much more to offer. That might have been it. And I'm okay with that too. I don't want to sound like somehow just because Trump was on the cover and has now won 2 terms as president, that somehow my career left me feeling disappointed. I'm the least disappointed. I sat with Ted Williams. Ted Williams.
Well, Scott, it's really been a pleasure. I'm sorry our time is limited. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Anytime.
Thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Ron.